boys and girls, we're here with another reaction video. I'm probably going to want to bang my head after this. I don't know how much time I'm going to spend on this video. I'm going to try and be polite and understanding. I guess we'll see how well that goes. It's entitled, "Why I Won't Switch to Linux for Video Production Ever?" ? So let's roll into it, shall we?
So here's a video I didn't expect to make and that I'm not proud of making, but I need to react. I need to vent this or I'm going to scream. And this is going to be inflammatory for the views and to make people mad because I'm tired of people making me mad about this subject. Linux is not usable for professional video editing, for day-to-day video editing, for high-level hardware utilization, pounding the hardware and the software for high resolution and high performance video editing. It is not usable, period. The open source...
Depends what you mean by not usable. It depends what your definition of high-end is. Are you talking 4K 60 or 1080 60? Are you talking... You got to be a little more specific. You're being really vague about stuff as far as that. Give me a break.
Video editors are not capable. They are lacking so many features, so many compatibility issues, everything. The operating system itself is not up to the needs of it. Codec licensing is a nightmare for open source software and things like that. File system support for external cards, none of it's there. I have just wasted half of an entire goddamn workday trying to do what would have been basic and really neat to include in a video, which was benchmarking. It started as benchmarking Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve between Windows 10 and an Ubuntu variant for testing render times and timeline performance and things like that, because I figured if it was made and optimized for Linux, it would have a little less headroom or a little less overhead to work with and perform a little better, or maybe it'd perform the same, or maybe it'd perform worse. I'd like to test it. And then it turned into a 1080 Ti versus RTX 2080 benchmark, and so both of those should have been easy. I have spent hours ripping my hair out and dealing with some very patient people in our Linux chat in my Discord server, trying to solve the most bare bones issues. DPI scaling is just completely...
DPI scaling. Do note, DPI scaling is garbage in almost every OS. It's up to the program, not just the OS, to fix that. How many classic Windows programs are terrible on 4K? And if you say none, you're full of shit. Just gonna say.
Unusable in many cases on Linux distros. I switched to Kubuntu, or
it's Kubuntu first off, get it right.
Kubuntu for the KDE desktop environment, which everyone has said is much better for high DPI scaling. And granted, it looks very nice and pretty. However,
it scales the desktop. It's up to the program to scale and use the same toolkit as the desktop environment. Newsflash.
It kept resetting my side monitor's resolution and scaling every time I logged into a new session, or logged into my session, and then to apply scaling, you had to start your session over again, which meant it would undo it, which meant Windows were having issues. Every time I tried to take a screenshot of a region, it shifted my monitor over and screwed things up. And while I'm at it, check this out when I try to take a region screenshot. Take a new screenshot.
That's because that's the toolbar window on the right side monitor there, Buckshot. That's why it does that.
Excuse me?
So select the entire area, hit enter, that window will go away.
What is over here? Nothing. It just like removes one of the desktops.
It did. It didn't remove it. It expanded the main window for the snapshot application or the screenshot application. That's it. Hit enter and okay, and there you go. Screenshot. Jesus.
What in the world? I couldn't mount my NAS because it wasn't cooperating with the file systems appropriately. That took hours trying to figure that out and get that mounted. Once I finally got that mounted, I couldn't access my external SSDs that I use for some of my cameras because exFAT isn't supported thanks to Microsoft, but I don't have it.
exFAT is supported. Pretty sure that's supported because every time I plug in anything or access the exFAT stuff that I got kicking around, because anything after a certain amount has to use exFAT, and that's all done remotely. And guess what? It reads it and it works.
Choice on using that because of my cameras.
So I'm gonna get to my point after I let you finish your little rant here.
I'm not going to switch to open source cameras to do my work. That's not how the world works. I needed exFAT support. It did, however, mount my internal drives just fine, so that was cool. OBS, everyone said snap package is easier. I was in a rush. Install OBS from the snap package, and it's OBS version 0.0.1. Okay. Quickly uninstalled that. Tried to install it from the repository. Instead, install the repository, and there were leftover files from the snap remove because I didn't run auto remove because whatever. Why? And then back and forth because OBS wasn't installed. Finally got OBS installed, and if I put OBS, actually pretty much in general, OBS could not sustain 4K 60 FPS recording of just a blank desktop in KDE Ubuntu, Kubuntu.
Kubuntu, and it's not KDE, it's Plasma. Get it the hell right.
Be it because of the desktop environment being more graphically intense or some other reason, despite using NVENC and this being totally capable on much lesser hardware anyway, but definitely capable on this hardware. Speaking of hardware, Kubuntu or KDE or whatever refused to acknowledge that I had the correct graphics driver installed. Every time I selected and applied the NVIDIA driver, which was the latest driver, 410, it kept just reverting the UI to saying that it had the Nuvo open source driver installed, or active, which I kept thinking it did and kept trying to switch, even tried an older version, but then
drivers only go effective when you restart the machine or you restart X. Control-Alt backspace, I believe, still works, and if it does not, well, log out, log back in, new driver applied. Not that hard. It sounds like you weren't doing that because, it's a thing.
I had it switched and pulled up the NVIDIA settings. The NVIDIA settings and the Xorg log both reflect the NVIDIA driver, so the UI for Kubuntu is just not cooperating there. Install Resolve. Resolve only has 2 activations, so I switched back to the free version. The free version doesn't support H.264 on Linux, probably because of some cost-saving measure for the licenses, which is just ridiculous. So then I had to go deactivate Resolve on another PC, come back, switch from the old version to Studio.
Dear God.
Then it can't render to H.264, but fine, that would have been fine at that point. But Resolve just keeps crashing every few minutes for no apparent reason, whether...
Okay. This is where I'm going to try not to rant and rave. Resolve. 2 supported platforms when it comes to Linux. They're both Red Hat based. CentOS and RHEL. What are you running it on? Kubuntu, or an Ubuntu base. Do I see a problem with that already? They test against CentOS and RHEL, not Ubuntu. So half your problem is not so much a software problem. In this case, you're complaining about Resolve. It's a user problem. The problem is not not the software or the OS. The problem is between the keyboard and the fucking chair. This is your experience, but a lot of these are problems you cause on yourself by you making decisions that are done by you. It is all your choice to run on these things. So if you didn't run on Fedora, if you didn't run on RHEL or CentOS, that's on you. If a game don't work on Manjaro, I'm not going to run and complain to Steam about it because they only support 2 platforms when it comes to Linux, Ubuntu and SteamOS. Those are the officially supported platforms because every different version of Linux is essentially a different OS. And if you don't treat it like that, then that's, again, a you problem, not an OS problem.
Selecting a folder, trying to relink a file, editing preferences, just keeps crashing to the desktop for no reason. By the way, on this Kubuntu installation, wherever there's a window open, that's where Windows just want to appear, despite not being my main monitor. So if I had OBS over here to record my main desktop, Resolve would open over here, but Resolve has no window border or window decoration, so I can't drag it over. What else have I run into?
And as you noted, let's go back for a second.
Window decoration, so I can't drag.
I can hold Shift or Alt and drag the window. Then do just that. Novel idea. Again, you're running on unsupported OS with a piece of software that is written for a different OS, essentially. So the fact that you're complaining that it doesn't function the way it should is a bit stupid, to be quite honest.
Over. What else have I run into? Resolve is just an unstable, unusable mess, and even when I was just trying to scrub footage, it's just like, oh, your graphics driver crapped out. Can't do anything about that. And it requires the proprietary driver, and it says it requires the most recent one. But again, for all the people who are pushing Resolve on Linux as a video editing option, because supposedly it's so good, Resolve is built for CentOS. It is built for pre-packaged production centers, basically. It is built for CentOS, and there is a third-party script you can use to rebuild the installation script into a proper Debian installation.
Did you just hear your own words? Used a third-party script to rebuild the installation script that's meant for CentOS and RHEL for Ubuntu. I'm seeing this as more of a user problem than an OS or software problem.
File, which is what I did, and then install it. However, the software itself doesn't work so hot, and up until the 15 beta and the 14 and or earlier versions, you couldn't even play system sound. You had to have a Blackmagic Deck Link hardware device to get sound output. Now there's no H.264 support. It is an unusable mess. So those of you who are recommending these things, have you ever actually used them? Probably not. Have anyone who recommends Linux for these things ever actually used it? Probably not. Everyone likes to, or all these people like to insist that I don't know what I'm doing with Linux.
Just as a note, I'm doing 1080p on this particular machine, and this is on Intel integrated software running OBS as a snap, by the way. Snap installed perfectly fine, and sudo snap install. I ain't got no problems. My gripe with what you're saying is, do you think because people make these recommendations they've never done it? How many other YouTubers that are Linux users are making Linux-related content on Linux? I can think of a good portion, and their content is really goddamn good. And the audio, video production, and that kind of stuff is something they pride themselves on. So you're putting yourself on a pretty high pedestal there, buddy. Might want to kind of check that ego. That's what it sounds like.
That I have not enough experience with it. I've been using Linux off and on as a laptop and office operating system, which is most of what it's good at, that in development.
From your experience and your use case, that's what it's good for. It works perfectly fine for me for this. Works perfectly fine as a gaming operating system. Works perfectly fine. It depends on your use, really.
For 20-something years, since the 90s, I grew up using Red Hat 5 alongside Windows 98. I used Ubuntu in the early...
If we're going to go back in time, machine, I've been using it since Mandrake. I've been using it since 99. I went to Mandrake. I went to OpenSUSE. I went to Ubuntu. I went to Debian. I went to Kali when it was still based on Slack. I went to Mint. I went to Manjaro for a long time, and then I went back to Ubuntu. So I've been using Linux just about as long as you, buddy, and it's got its pros, it's got its cons, just like everything else. The current issues I'm seeing are ones that you, by the choices you made, the problem is not the software. The problem is because it sits between the keyboard and the chair. I don't know how else to reiterate that statement.
Early 2000s, that's how I used most of my computers. I enjoyed GNOME 2. It was a blast. While I may not do a whole lot of advanced stuff simply because it doesn't meet my needs, I have used it. I know what the hell I'm doing. It doesn't work for these things.
And this is where I'm going to get to this point. It does not work for these things in your case. And that's okay. For you, for whatever reason, these tools do not work. So use the tools that best work for you. It's 100% okay. It's a legitimate argument. The those idiots, the FOSS zealots and ideologues, they can take a flying leap. It doesn't matter. You'll find most real Linux users tend to be pragmatist over anything else.
Speaking of video editors not being good enough, Resolve, again, very bad. Had someone else come in our Discord server who was very disappointed in Kden Live because they just kept running into bugs, crashes, and other issues, and it just didn't meet their needs, despite the fact that they...
Again, use what works. Use what works for your needs. It's a novel concept that apparently people don't get. My gripe so far from listening to this has been, it doesn't work because it didn't work for me. That's stupid. You're telling 134,000 people who subscribe to you that this is a bad tool. No, it's a bad tool for you. For whatever reason, it did not work for you. So now that means potential tools for people that are looking for tools to use are going to avoid these because you, of all people, these tools did not work for your case and your workflow, etc., whatever insert reason here. That's 134,000 less people that are going to experiment and try software now. I get voicing your frustrations with software. I have it a lot. But you don't hear me whine, bitch, and complain about it. I just use the software that works. If I develop a workflow, that's the workflow I go with. I don't care what other people think. I'm using Linux right now for this. If I needed to do this on Windows, yeah, I would. Mac, okay. End of the day, the tools are just a means to an end. So I think, if anything, videos like these do a disservice because they only speak to one person's experience, but that's 134,000 people now that aren't going to try to experience and have their own experience with this software and the operating system. And that does a total disservice. So you can talk word of mouth and all this other stuff, but for me, this kind of stuff is so counterproductive.
So very much wanted to, which is a story I hear time and time again. I'm trying to...
That's a story you hear time and time again, and I hear a story and see factually stories that tell me otherwise. Look on YouTube. Excuse me. How many Linux YouTubers are doing video production with Linux on YouTube? You'll find that number is quite high. And they are not doing low-level stuff.
Think of other things. I just issue after issue after issue of things that should just work. Oh, and in certain programs like Discord, my cursor, which is already not high enough DPI for a 4K screen, is really tiny on Discord and very hard to see. minor thing, but all those things add up to just things where, why would I use Linux in this situation? At no point in this process, when literally every little thing I try to do, there's a roadblock, there's an issue, there's something that doesn't work, at no point is this a serviceable replacement for Windows. At no point does this replace Windows on my workstation, on my work PC, where I do my work day in and day out that I get paid for and am expected to uphold a turnaround time and a level of quality. At no point does it make sense to use Linux as a desktop operating system for that. I will
You forgot 2 words. For you.
continue to use it on my laptops for office stuff. It's where I like to write my scripts, do my emails, mess around on laptops where it doesn't matter what happens to them. And everybody jumping on it because of the 1809 update, the random file deletion of the 1809 update can happen anywhere. That is the important.
Oh, hey. Something that you just said. This stuff can happen anywhere to anyone at any time. Welcome to software. So, for the people complaining about the 1809 update for Windows 10 that had their files get deleted, you're just saying, oops, it happens. If a Linux update did that, you'd be flipping your crap right now. Little bias, much?
Importance of backup systems, because it can strike at any time. And in fact, I believe there was an Ubuntu and maybe even a Fedora update that wound up deleting stuff for people. It just happens. Windows has a bad history with Windows 10, but it's not the only situation where that happens. I'm pretty sure it's happened on Mac as well. I'm just done. I am fed up. I just wanted to include and be one of the first people to include some serious Linux Resolve coverage, because while Resolve has so many issues on its own as a NLE, and I don't think it is the right choice for most people at the moment, I wanted to support the only capable free option for the degree of work that I do that would be available on Linux, and I can't.
I have yet to hear anything about Lightworks. Or is that workflow just too different?
It is nowhere worth my time anymore. Dealing with a couple botched updates when they come, when I know how to deal with them, is far much better, a better use of my time. Even having to reinstall Windows takes like an hour, and then I'm back up and running. Little downtime to reconfigure things. I rarely have to do that. It's like once every year and a half. Far much better use of my time than dealing with anything like this involving Linux and video production. Oh, and OBS Studio. Did I mention? Yeah, I mentioned that it didn't install from Snap. I had to add the repository after all, and then that wouldn't work. And then again, it doesn't perform well for some reason. Who knows? Could be the desktop environment. I may return to this specific setup that I was trying to use on my main rig.
Or it could be your OBS settings that you're not tweaking like you're supposed to, because every system needs different tweaks for OBS to work good, because what I use for the Surface Pro is not what I use on my main rig. Just saying, different hardware requires different settings.
At some point in time with base Ubuntu, even though I was trying to get away from it for a few reasons and everyone said it was fine. And I realized that this is not entirely the fault of Linux itself or open source software, but rather the people who say things about it, the people who advocate for it, the evangelists that just blindly roll in and give recommendations. But I would expect if people are this elitist and this tech snobbery about their computers and about their operating system and their software, to have a little bit of understanding or have a little bit of perspective as to what people's needs are before they say these things. But no, in the Linux world, or in the internet people talking about things world of Linux, Linux is perfect, Linux is great, until you identify a situation where you can't use it, and the response every time to me is, why would you try to do that on Linux? Why would you want to do that on Linux? No, you can't do that on Linux. Linux isn't built for that. Open source software isn't built for that. You can't expect that. They're at a disadvantage. You need to tailor back your wants or expectations or needs. You just need to not do your job.
Now you're just being a facetious douche. Just saying. It's not about tailoring back expectations, etc. It's not even that. Any any real Linux user is going to be a pragmatist. Yes, they have an ideological lean. They have a preference for open source, of course, or free and open source software, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, we're all about using the right tool for the right job. So if that means running Windows with, Adobe Premiere or whatever, then that's what we're going to recommend you probably use. Linus Torvalds even used proprietary software at one point to keep the kernel going before he created Git. That should tell you something. That's the mentality most Linux users will have. And no, real Linux users know there's problems with the platform, and we'll be the first to tell you those problems. It's just we just prefer the open source nature by the fact that with openness comes advantages and disadvantages. Just like Windows has its advantages and disadvantages, Mac OS has its advantages and disadvantages. The difference is people like you have come to the point where you just accept the problems of Windows or Mac OS. But if any problem shows up in Linux, it's all Linux's fault. But if a similar thing happens in Windows or OS 10 or Mac OS, then it's okay because it happens. Give me a break. That is such a lopsided argument that you can't win. It doesn't matter what I would say to that. I'm not going to win that argument. But, hey, I'm a pragmatist that leans open source, but I'm also a realist and understand that not every workflow and not every tool in open source is the right tool for the job.
I'm done. I am done. Period. I will still cover basic Linux coverage as I have for newbies on my channel, because I find that to be very valuable. That's one of the few kinds of Linux video content that makes a whole lot of sense, which is kind of funny since all the people who seemingly already know so much about Linux are the ones who go watch it, because once you get past the newbie stage on Linux, video content doesn't make a whole lot of sense outside of maybe benchmarks like I was trying. But other than the, hey, look, there's a new version, or hey, there's a cool tool I found while using it on my laptop, I'm done trying to support it for this stuff. I'm done playing ball with this community. I'm sorry. You're wrong. You clearly have no idea what my needs are. None of my hardware. I mean, some of my hardware. Okay. I have a very lengthy video discussion coming soon with my buddy Dylan about choosing a video editing platform and what's all involved with this, and it's a really good discussion. And despite all this, I'm really excited to share that as I get it edited up. But my needs for an operating system, for my work that I have to do day to day, I need a competent video editing.
Do note 2 words: your needs. Everyone's got different needs.
Workflow of multiple software suites, because I use Audition, After Effects, Premiere, Photoshop, Adobe Media Encoder, Resolve.
Well, seeing how you just listed off every single Adobe product essentially, it sounds like maybe the best tool for the job is not the one provided by the Linux platform. And that's okay, believe it or not. If that's what you prefer, if that works better for your workflow, then use it. Don't go on this 20-minute tirade of BS, whining, complaining, and saying that the platform is crap because of your experience. Again, this is your experience. Personally, I say a lot of the problems you ran into were between the keyboard and the chair, because specifically you focus a lot on Resolve. You're running on an unsupported platform, which is in Ubuntu. That's a you problem. Now, as far as the OS, it does have its problems. Sound system is terrible. As far as 4K and all the other stuff, I'm going to leave that for other people who do 4K content. I'm good with 1080p at 30. So, you know, I think yeah, you're better off sticking with Adobe products from the sounds of it, and that's okay.
Other proprietary plugin suites and video encoding tools and Blackmagic proprietary codecs and raw codecs and ProRes codecs and things that there aren't licenses for on Linux. I need support for my hardware devices that I use day to day, support for my macros that I integrate into Premiere Pro that make me be able to edit how I can, support for 4K, DPI scaling to make it.
You have built your entire workflow around Adobe. Adobe does not support Linux. There's going to be different workflows that is required. Now, it sounds like you're trying to adapt when you go to Linux, and I'll give you that. However, you have developed a workflow in Adobe. It's okay to stick to Adobe.
Look usable, optimized hardware support for the beefy rigs that I have in the first place, which just isn't present.
Optimize, says the guy using DaVinci Resolve on Ubuntu when they don't support it. Hello, irony.
I need proxy support. I need color grading tools. I need so much that isn't present, and it's beyond. It's more than just, oh look, we got Kdenlive or OpenShot. You have a video editor, you can go. Well, yes, if I were stranded on a desert island and I absolutely had to life or death make a video, I could do it.
Now you're just being so any of us who use Kdenlive or OpenShot or Lightworks or anything that is lower quality are not on your level? Is that basically what you're saying? Because that's how it comes across to me.
But I could not make the videos that I make day to day in the quality, in the speed, in the at all sense that I do now on Linux right now. Haven't been able to in the past, can't right now, might at some point in the future. That time is not now, that time is not any time.
And then use the tools that allow you to do it. I don't know how many other ways to tell you that.
In the near future, not so distant future, sure, possibly, but not now and not tomorrow. Maybe next year. And by next year, we're talking 5 years, not literally next year. Maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, but it's not here. And I'm done considering it or playing ball with those who think I'm crazy for not doing it.
I don't think you're crazy. I think your experience is what you've experienced. By all means, share it. Hopefully some things will improve because of it. What I would say is that you have a very slanted perspective on things. And now, because your slanted perspective on things is you are, to me, a Windows user looking for a Windows workflow with Windows-based applications, essentially, in Linux. Newsflash, it ain't gonna happen. That's okay. Use the tools that work for you, but don't expect the same type of workflow. Don't expect the same type of unknown issues or known issues. And as far as your 20 years, props for you. That's all I'm going to say.
Windows sucks. Windows 10 sucks. Microsoft's lack of QA team sucks. That's why people like me test the updates early so we can get this information out there.
And the fact that you just showed that you're a Windows insider, it gives me exactly where your perspective is skewed to.
But it just doesn't make sense. It's not just an initial learning cost or transition cost. It just is not possible. And I'm tired of people telling me otherwise.
And again, it's not possible for you.
And the inconsistencies really get me. I mentioned my exFAT drives weren't working on K Ubuntu, so to cover my bases, I am trying Linux Mint and base Ubuntu on this system just to have an accurate sample of what's happening. The exFAT drives work fine on Linux Mint, so it's clearly not a Linux issue, but the fact that file system support of all things doesn't work out of box and is inconsistent when I kind of have to pick and choose between distros to get any aspect of things that I want is just not acceptable as an end user. It's fine for those who want to have their free time and their...
It's not even that. It's all about how the file managers handle stuff. A lot of how often does Windows ever recognize an ext4 file format? No. Change that file format to NTSF or something else, it'll recognize it completely easily. That's the point. exFAT is great as far as that. It's just the way Dolphin works that it probably doesn't play nice with your exFAT. Mint uses Nemo, and Ubuntu uses an old version of Nautilus/Files.
I'll be dedicated to fixing their operating system, which is ironic given that operating system maintenance is the whole reason you would be trying to force everyone to move from Windows. But for those who just want to work, it's freaking stupid. And it got work.
I do plenty of work on Linux, and I get plenty of work done. So the only thing that's stupid is the fact that you seem to be holding yourself in a really high regard. You almost got that Lunduke mentality. You hold yourself up here, I think.
I wouldn't have expected it, but I wanted to cover my butt in terms of making sure I did everything I could, and so I gave Linux Mint a try. And at first, despite a lot of headache initially getting set up, once I did eventually get Resolve working, it was actually rendering fairly quickly, and I was pretty excited, even though Resolve was just as unstable as on Ubuntu, and it kept crashing to the desktop with no errors at random points and whatever. I thought I had figured out the final piece. I kept getting an error 77 with regards to the GPU driver.
And again, unsupported distro, unsupported OS. That part is a you problem, and a problem you made. But God forbid we point that out.
I thought, or I hypothesized, was being caused by the Blackmagic raw codec. So I deleted that file from the project and went to and rebooted because it was no longer functioning after that weird GPU hiccup. And after that point, Resolve no longer started working. I tried installing a bunch of different things from support from those of you who were trying to be helpful on Twitter and Discord. We tried going through dependencies, reinstalling Resolve, doing a million different things, and the end result was my Cinnamon session just being completely broken. Just gave me a tiny little error in the middle of the screen with OK in lowercase, and I click it and couldn't boot it anymore. The install's just gone. And obviously there's ways to fix it, but at no point during any of this journey would any of this been a good use of my time. Thus far, Windows has not done anything that significantly wrong to have made any of this worth my time. Nor can I say it's worth yours if you're a video editor or content creator. Sure, the Linux gamer.
I'm creating content on Linux using Kdenlive and OBS perfectly fine. And yes, that middle finger is for you. So I should stop using the tool that works for me? That's great advice. I'm not. And you mentioned Gardner, Linux Gamer. I'm curious to hear this.
Can make some videos on Linux. He makes videos very infrequently. He uses very basic needs. He has some gameplay capture and a webcam and an analog microphone. I'm not going to negatively speak about the quality of his videos, but his needs are on a very much lower tier than mine.
So you're holding him here and you up here because your quality of your content is just that much higher. Superiority complex much? Sound like Lunduke. Sound like an over-opinionated content creator in this case, as opposed to an over-opinionated blogger who wants to be a text journalist.
Other than that, there's no one doing what I do on Linux with what's available without Pixar's in-house developed tools or whatever. It's not there.
again, you're holding your content pretty high, buddy. So you saying you make the best content available? I'm pretty sure MKBHD would say otherwise. I don't see you recording with red cameras, bud.
It's not going to be there for a while. And I'm done listening to it. I'm done hearing about it. I'm done feeling like I'm doing something wrong. I've tried multiple distros. I've tried multiple different setups and configurations.
You're not doing anything wrong at all. The problem that I'm seeing with this is your experience has been bad. That's fine. Use the tools that work for you. And anybody who's making suggestions about why, you should switch to Linux. If you know it doesn't work for you, there's this great thing called ignore the fuck out of them. Because you know what you need to get stuff done. You are technologically inclined enough to figure out if the tools you need are available on a platform. You try the platform, it doesn't work. You still have the tools you need. So this 20-minute rant has essentially been pointless. Hey, I tried this on Linux, it didn't work. These are some of the problems I ran into. That's a perfectly valid argument. What I don't like is like the superiority complex and that you're having, like your content's like this much better than everybody else's. That is a load of crap. Your content is no good. I've watched people in 240p's content that have made better content than some dude that makes 4K 60. Because at least they know at least they're passionate about what they're doing. And at least they are talking about what they know and their experience. You're giving your experience and you're looking for that and you're giving you the problems you ran into. That's perfectly valid. But to slag off an entire community because of your one bad experience says a lot about you more than it says about the community. Because I won't ever advocate that somebody use tools that when they say what their job is or their workflow is, that doesn't work for them. I'll give them the recommendation for the tools that they might work on their platform that they need.
Every time I try to do stuff related to content creation, it just ends in me being so completely miserable and never getting what I want. And to end this, I'm going to include a quote from John Prosser's Why I Left Android video, which I think very much kind of expresses what I'm trying to convey here. And you can go check out the full video linked in the description.
But John, you can customize it. You can make it any way you want it. Yeah. Fuck off. The solutions to the problems with the software, problems with the hardware should never, ever have to be answered by me, the consumer.
The only time that those problems should be answered by you, the consumer, is when you are the one causing them. As far as your DaVinci Resolve things, I'm not negating the problems you had with Ubuntu with DaVinci Resolve. I'm going to negate the fact by the simple fact that you installed via a third-party script on an unsupported distro, and then you complain about it. That's not a DaVinci Resolve problem, that's a you problem. As far as the tools not being accurate, okay, maybe they don't work for you. That's awesome. Go back to Windows, go back to Mac OS, use what tools work for you. Perfectly legitimate argument. Any Linux user who gives you crap about that is not a real Linux user because we're pragmatists. We have an open source slant, I won't lie, but at the end of the day, we also are pragmatic about using the right tool for the job. So the only biggest recommendation I have for you is you might want to knock that ego back down to, I don't know, Earth. Because I'll tell you right now, you don't produce the best content on YouTube, in spite of what you apparently think. There's confidence, there's overconfidence, and there's being a douchebag tool. You're somewhere in between overconfident and douchebag tool. So that's my take on this whole video. 44 minutes, I'm done. You guys know what to do. Rate it, subscribe. Peace.